With patch 1.3 giving massive buffs to the Grand Cathay army, now the matchup between Ogres and Cathay is now super beneficial one-sided for Cathay. With the buffs to Harmony, the Grand Cannon is able to just basically shoot down every single artillery pieces that the Ogre Kingdoms might bring, and even if you want to rush them with Ogre melee units, unfortunately, now that missile troops can basically stack on top of melee units and fire unhindered, your units are gonna get shot to pieces before they can even hit the front line. After suffering on the ladder, I finally figured out a way to counter them, although it's not exactly tournament legal, but at least it'll give you even odds against a regular player on the ladder. And you can adjust the build itself before going into a tournament. Now, the build concept behind this build is that artillery needs to see you to shoot you. But if most of your army is hidden, then they don't have any good targets to shoot at. And this is exactly what we're doing today with a bunch of stalking troops, Gorgers on the flanks, in stalking right now. In the front line, we have the Nobbler Trappers also in stalking, and at the back, two massive Stonehorn with Hunters on top, bringing this crucial item called the Nobbler Thief Stone, granting them that stalking ability, and now, well, they are unspottable as well. That means the Grand Cannon cannot shoot them before they reach the front line, and once they reach the front line, well, these peasants are gonna get a smacking from all the Stonehorn charges. As for the rest of the army, the spottable part, we have a bunch of Nobblers and also a single Saber Tusk pack for some cheap mobility. And for the leadership, we have the Slaughtermaster of the Great Maw here, bringing two crucial spells. One of them, the staple Troll Guts for healing, and the second one, the Maw, a really crucial spell in busting the missile blobs of Grand Cathay. And yeah, that's basically it for the army builds. Now let's go into combat and see how this build performs against the dreaded Cathay missile box. With some nice RNG, we actually got spawned into the best map to counter the Cathay artillery box, the floating land, where the hill in the middle and also the tree line will be blocking up a bunch of Grand Cannon fire. Although there are some stray cannonballs passing through the tree line and hitting the hunters who are now hidden. Now the Cathay cannot see them, but unfortunately they're aiming at the Slaughtermaster who is not hiding. So those collateral damage did hit one of my hunter, although only doing some minor damage. Anyways, the rest of the infantry will be pushing up ahead. The Nobbler Trappers moving in will be really effective against the lightly armored Iron Hail Gunners. Of course, with them revealed, my opponent can choose to shoot them as they do not have any line of sight on my Slaughtermaster or my hunters. So, well, they can waste their ammo on them, but then they're dirt cheap, so I'm fine with taking that engagement. And also, Nobbler Trappers with their missiles trade actually pretty darn well against the lightly armored Iron Hail Gunners, and I will just be pushing them ahead, not engaging them in melee combat, just standing quite far away from the front line and start peppering the Iron Hail Gunners with their scrap metal projectile. And on the flanks, my Gorgers will be also moving forward, hoping to try to find a break on my opponent, who is basically utilizing the impassable terrain here, lining up all his infantry around the flanks, and I don't actually have a direct route to get into the backline. But fret not, we have the Stonehorns here, who do not have any mass problems, plowing straight into the backline of my opponent's range formations, and there we go, a Maul spell. Just om-nom-nomming all these blobbed up infantry from Cathay, annihilating one of the Iron Hail Gunners who have already taken some decent damage from the Nobbler Trappers, and now I can start moving on to shutting down the other Iron Hail Gunners. And at the back, the Stonehorns are just kind of rampaging through the backline. Nothing can really pin down their high mass bodies in the Cathay roster. Their cavalry isn't quite sufficient, and definitely not the peasants. So they will be just plowing through the infantry and cavalry protection, going straight for the Grand Cannons, while the Iron Hail Gunners will be busy turning around trying to crossfire, as my Nobbler Trappers will be chipping away their hit points with their projectiles, and the Nobblers trying to break through these Jade Warriors will not be having any success. But that is not exactly the main concern right now, as my major micro are still focused on the double Stonehorns, just cycle charging, ping-ponging around different units, hoping to cause as much disruption in my opponent's lines as possible, so that I can just find the chances to shut down those Grand Cannon. Unfortunately, this one unit of Hunter is being tied down by a bunch of anti-armor, anti-large Ancestral Warriors, and crossfired by Iron Hail Gunners and Grand Cannon, pinned down by cavalry as well, unable to extract himself before taking too much damage, and he will be routed. Nonetheless, I'll still be continuing my push with finally some more Nobblers arriving at the front line. They'll be coming in with their missile support again, hoping to chip away the remaining Grand Cannon crew and the routing Iron Hail Gunners due to the presence of the terrifying Stonehorns. And then there's these Iron Hill Gunners trying to reform their ranks, getting into a position to crossfire onto my Stonehorn Hunters. You can see that they're just trying to aim at my Hunters who is routing, but there will be a bunch of Nobbler Trappers showering them in a bunch of scrap metal projectiles, and they will be routed from the damage for now, while the remaining Hunter still having decent HP left, around 3k, but another nasty volley from the Iron Hill Gunners putting it down to around 2500 health. But the Troll Guts, a super clutch healing spell from the Slaughter Master himself. This emergency hit point replenishment helped him to stabilize his leadership as the remaining missile troops of Cathay are all routing, and now the Hunter can freely charge around the Cathay backline. Gorgeous finally sneaking around and opening at the back, trying to get into the backline, but my opponent here pinning them down with the Jade Lances, but that does leave them unable to support and protect the Grand Cannon, who is exposed to a bunch of Nobbler Trapper fire. While at the front line, Nobbler supporting my Slaughter Master against the Jade Lances and the hunt of the Dragon-Blooded Shugengan Lord. Unfortunately, he'll probably go down sometime soon due to the dedicated sniping power. But good news is, at least my other Hunter who has routed has returned from routing, receiving a Butcher since we have already slaughtered a whole bunch of Cathay troops, now activating the Tier 3 army ability for the Ogre Kingdoms. And he'll be healing up, plowing into the ranks of Cathay peasants yet again, probably terrifying them soon with the support of some... actually, no more support, everything routed in the vicinity. Gorgeous charging in, thankfully they're unbreakable, so they'll be forcing their way into some Grand Cannons and rout them swiftly with the support of the Nobbler Trapper, while my Hunter Stonehorns are still rolling through the front line unimpeded due to their colossal size. Really, the only thing that can stop them are Sentinels, but unfortunately they're not here in the battle. Anyways, the Nobbler Trappers will be continuing to prepare down the Jade Warriors, while the charging animation of the Stonehorn is basically unstoppable, and at the back there are some returning Celestial Dragon Crossbows and Iron Hill Gunners blasting away at the Nobblers, which I am fine with, as my other Stonehorn Hunter will be rushing over to prevent these armor-piercing missiles to be used to their full potential. He will be using his monstrous charges, receiving yet another heal, probably the last one Troll Gut from the Slaughter Master, who's about to go down, surrounded by the Ancestral Warriors and the Shugengan Lord, and then using his Master Plow into these Iron Hill Gunners yet again, and yeah, curb stomp them on the side. When you look at the overview of the battlefield, the balance of power is pretty even for the two armies, but I do have the advantage of a bunch of Stonehorns here, just massive mass and damaging firepower as well as melee power, while my opponent's Ancestral Warriors will be disappearing soon, and I still have some healing in my back pocket despite the Slaughter Master going down. Remember, I still have my army ability and one of them the Butcher ability, who just healed up one of my Stonehorns, and now if I get enough kills on these poor peasants of Cathay, then I will be able to use that ability once again. And yeah, let's see if I can get enough for another cast. Anyways, on the side here, the Grand Cannon crew, Iron Hill Gunners, and Celestial Dragon Crossbows are escorted off the battlefield by this Stonehorn Hunter over here, and on the other side, my Stonehorn Hunter is ramming straight into these poor peasants, doing massive impact damage. And as Cathay peasants, they can't really do anything about it with only their sticks and their flimsy courage. That gives me enough kill counts to activate the Butcher ability, and this one less healthy Stonehorn is healed up as well. My opponent now tries to slow down my Stonehorn Hunters with a Storm of Shadows. It is not exactly a great concern here, as it doesn't really affect charge speed, and as long as I have the charge, the animation should give me enough momentum to plow through any remaining infantry and cavalry of Cathay. The Shugengan Lord drops in, hoping to snipe out my Hunter with a last-ditch attempt, but only one of them is really engaging him right now, as the other one is just standing back, using the javelins of the Hunter, the anti-large armor piercing shots, to really chip away the health of this poor lord, and then he just kind of charges in, and the poor Shugengan Lord will be crushed between two ancient colossal beasts. When using this build, you have to pay attention to a few things. First off, the Hunters do have the duplicate item. They both have that Nobbler Thief Stone right there. So you need to make some adjustments to the build before you can bring it to a tournament. And secondly, you need to make sure your Slaughter Master is alive, because that's where your healing and your devastating AoE spell comes from. When they are marching towards the enemy, they do not have the stock ability, and they will be exposed to the artillery fire from all the Grand Cannons. And if you don't pay attention to him, he will be sniped by those artillery fire. So make sure when your army is marching towards your enemy, you are always in control of your lord. Make sure he is doing those zigzag actions to dodge artillery fire, so he can get close enough to engage in melee, get his passive heals, and then provide the spell support that your army needs. And that spell support can make a huge difference here. With the Stonehorns charging into a tight box, more often than not something like this would happen. Your opponent would panic and then clump up a bunch of units around, hoping to pin down the hunter and do some nice surround and crossfire. But unless they're a micro god in a tight space with a bunch of units, this will bound to happen with a bunch of units overlapping each other, and that is where you strike with a massive maul. The spell does a lot of damage to unarmored units like the Iron Hail Gunners, and can be devastating if you use it in the right place. The problem is Ogres doesn't have the most magic, and normally you only have enough Winds of Magic for one cast in the early game, and after that you'll be spending all that magic in Troll Guts. So you need to make that one cast count. It doesn't have to be the most amazing, but it at least should be accomplishing something, like routing a single unit or hitting multiple infantry units and severely weakening them. And if you use it right, you should be able to create some weak spots in your opponent's artillery box, alleviating some of the missile pressure on your Stonehorns. And that brings us to the most important thing of this entire build, the constant cycle charging of the Hunter Stonehorns. They need to be using their charge speed, charge animation, their mass to their advantage here, just slamming through different units, cycling around all the backline of the Cathay army, disrupting multiple units at once. In the best case scenario, you will be able to terrify them with the Stonehorns, and then the missiles will be disrupted, unable to fire for a while. Even if you can't terrify them, at the very least you can stop them from shooting by disrupting them and knocking them over. And when your Stonehorn leaves them alone and start hitting something else, that unit will still need some time to reorganize before they can shoot again, which you can easily prevent by distracting them with some other units like the second unit of Stonehorns or these Gorgers here. At the same time, don't be hesitant to throw in your Gorgers to combat. I mean, they're not gonna do the most damage here, especially after the nerf. They are basically like an unbreakable linchpin, making sure they can stay in combat and then disrupting other missile units from firing, or just hang around, support the Stonehorns whenever they can with their anti-infantry armor-piercing attacks. The main damaging role are still reserved to the two Stonehorn units, as they just kind of plow through with their massive impact damage. Once you're done with the missile infantry, without the missile threat, the Stonehorns would be free to curb storm the remaining melee infantry. And then at last you can finally focus down the big massive monsters, Zhao Ming in this case, or sometimes Miao Ying. And if they didn't bring a dragon, well, congratulations, you are gonna have an easier time sniping out their lord. Also, the Slaughtermaster would be a nice choice in fighting the missile infantry here. He has good mass, good speed, decent melee stats for a caster lord, and don't forget about his passive healing when engaging in melee. It definitely makes him sturdier than he looks. On top of that, he needs to go into melee combat to recharge his ability, extra ingredients to get those extra Winds of Magic regeneration. Before we end the video, let's do a quick wrap up in the post-battle screen. The Ogre Kingdoms army relies on being stealthy, using the stock on the Nobbler Trappers, the Gorgers, and the Hunters with the Thief Stone to get into the face of the Grand Cathay army, avoiding their artillery fire as the Grand Cathay army cannot see them. And then using the mass of the Hunter's Stonehorns to charge into the backline, disrupt their shots, so that you can disrupt their movement and force blobs to be formed, allowing the Slaughtermaster to capitalize with the devastating spell, the Maw. While at the same time you have the Nobblers chipping away the health of all the Cathay units. Of course, the best targets are the Iron Hail Gunners, but if they're not present, then other targets like the Dragon Crossbows, Jade Warriors with halberds, or simply peasants would suffice. With the introduction of the new shooting mechanic where you can basically slap your ranged units on top of melee units and still fire unimpeded, the Ogre units, the Ogre monstrous infantry, does not work well against the Grand Cathay anymore, as the Jade Warriors will hold the line and peasants as well, and then the ranged units will pepper them to pieces with their arrow fire, crossbow bolts, and the Iron Hail Gunners slug shots. More often than not, the Grand Cannons would also obliterate some Ogre infantry before they get to the front line. So really, just relying on anything but regular Ogres in this Ogre Kingdom build, unfortunate, but this is necessary to counteract the new buffed up and super OP Grand Cathay in land battles. As for the army performances here, as you can see, the Stonehorn Hunters are the MVP here, doing some massive damage against enemy units, and the Slaughtermaster doing some decent damage with the melee kills and the Great Maw, while the rest of the army, Nobbler Trappers earning back their value with a bunch of shots against the Iron Hell Gunners and also absorbing a lot of that ammo. And then the Gorgers, as you can see here, not really here for earning back the value, but more likely to be an unbreakable linchpin, annoyance, a thorn in the side of the Cathay army, disrupting their missile backline, while the Sabertusk pack and the Nobblers over here are just basically to disrupt and tangle up any Jade Warriors and maybe chase down any routing units. While the Grand Cathay army, as you can see here, the Grand Cannon didn't really do too much damage as most of my units got into their face, disrupting their firing before they can even find a good target to shoot at. And the Iron Hell Gunners, as usual, the ones able to crossfire at my expensive units got a lot of damage, but most of them were not, simply because I was disrupting them with a bunch of psycho charges, and most of the time they weren't even firing. And then we have the Cathay infantry not doing anything significant other than the peasants trying to grind through my ogre units, including the expensive Gorgers and the Stonehorn Hunters. Although despite the damage they did with the Iron Hell Gunners, the peasants, and even the Dragon-blooded Shugengan Lord, the Hunters were able to heal that back all up with the Troll Gut spells and also the army ability of Butcher. And of course, the Jade Lancers, one of the crappiest cavalry in the game, didn't quite do enough to carry the game, didn't even earn back their own value. As you might have experienced in land battles on ranked multiplayer, the Ogre Kingdoms have a pretty rough time dealing with any missile spamming factions like the Grand Cathay and Kislev, but in the case of Grand Cathay right now, this is definitely not an impossible match if you can find the right solutions for it. And in this case, we have the double Stonehorn Hunters with their Stealthy Nobbler Thiefstone. And yeah, that's the end of today's video. I hope you find it helpful, and if you do and want to see more Total War Warhammer multiplayer content, remember to hit the subscribe button down below to get notified when I upload new videos. I'll be doing more tips and strategies videos for Total War Warhammer multiplayer, regular battle replays, and also some wild meme army builds. And if you have any replays that you want to share, feel free to drop by my Discord or send me an email with the replay file attached. I'll be sure to check them out. And yeah, that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.